This is our open house series, and I represent the pagan and multi-theistic faiths on the council. Tonight, our speaker is Rabbi Michelle Paskow from Congregation B'nai Emet right here in Simi Valley. So I want to welcome Rabbi Michelle and remind everybody we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So welcome, Rabbi Michelle.
Thank you. So I'm honored to be here tonight to share with you a little bit about the Jewish religion. And as we start, I just wanted to say I'm so appreciative that we have our important interfaith group so we can learn about each other's traditions and most importantly, to befriend one another. So I appreciate all the work that you do and also everyone else on our group. So let me share my screen.
Great.
Can you see it?
Not just yet.
Okie doke. Here we go. And I will get it in a sec. Well, I will try.
I see it.
Sorry about this. I have to, here we go. Here we go. Now you got it, right?
Yes.
See it? Okay, good. So I want to give you a little overview of the Jewish people, our faith, and our history. And I'll use these words and we'll come back to them at the very end. I'll give you a little overview while standing on one foot. So there's kind of a joke about that or a Jewish story about that. And we'll conclude with that story because I'm going to also add that part of Judaism is having some good humor. So we have to laugh at things in life. So Judaism, to me, this is my interpretation. It's more than a religion. It's a faith, it's a people, and many, many layers of history and culture. And not only have we been influenced by the many peoples and places where we've lived, but we've also left our mark on them. And it's interesting, the word religion actually comes from the word, like the word ligament. It has the same root. And the ligaments are the fibrous tissues that keep our bones and organs in place. And I see religion as a structure for people, it gives people a structure. And so the Jewish religion and people, I see it as a living body that continues to evolve through time. And the star on the left in Hebrew, it says Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel are alive. So that's kind of based on when Joseph hears about their father, when he meets the brothers in that story, in Exodus, and he says, is our father still alive? Ha'od avi chai, is my father still alive? So we use this slogan, the people of Israel are alive. And so Judaism, it continues to evolve throughout time. We don't live in a vacuum. So it's rooted and based in the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, but it also grows and is shaped by our historical experiences. And we'll probably come back to that as well, because I put something in about modernity. So I hope you can see the top.
Yes.
I give you a little bit about Jewish beliefs. So I like to start with this. I'm going to give you some highlights. So, and I'm laughing at myself because I've been teaching Judaism, living Judaism my whole life, but teaching Judaism for 40 plus years. And it was really hard to kind of synthesize not what do Jews believe. Here's the book I have that I love, What Do Jews Believe? And my dad always says the book shouldn't be called What Do Jews Believe? Because we believe all kinds of things. It's what does Judaism teach? But I'm going to give you some highlights, some key points. I'll do my best. So Judaism is one of the oldest continuous traditions since ancient times that still exists and is practiced, and I would say is even relevant today. So, and I put this on the bottom. This was from the olden days before the internet when they sent you flyers in the mail, and it was to buy this collection of books about many ancient, interesting peoples, right? The Persians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Hittites, and so forth. And the cultures are fascinating, but guess what? None of those peoples exist anymore. There are people in Egypt, They're not the ancient Egyptians. They're mostly Muslims and Christians. There were Jews there as well. And they speak Arabic. They're not speaking ancient Egyptian. The Persians are Iranians. Most of them are Muslims. There are minority religions there, but they're, for the most part, they're Muslims. So those peoples from ancient times, those cultures in a sense no longer exist. So Judaism still exists. We still speak Hebrew. We've revived Hebrew in essence. So it's still rooted to the essence of it. And at the same time, it's changed. So what's the secret to survival? So we've lived through COVID this past year, right? So what did we do to survive? We're just talking about services and what we're doing. What do you have to do in order to survive? You have to adapt. You have to be flexible, because if you don't flex and you don't change, you may fall by the wayside. So some of these groups didn't survive. Either they were conquered or society changed, cultures changed. So Judaism, these are words I learned in the army from a soldier. Judaism has been able to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And so this is kind of interesting. I'm not going to give a whole long history, but the history is fascinating. Jews were conquered by many, many people. So Israel was conquered numerous times, and all of those peoples had an influence on Judaism and the Jewish people. So I'll just give you two things that are really interesting, and it'll also bring in some history. So once the Israelites were living in the land of Israel, they created a centralized place of worship with the temple in Jerusalem. So that's a picture, you know, a dramatized picture that someone made recently. We don't have pictures from ancient times, but of Solomon's temple. So Solomon built a temple 3,000 years ago, and it lasted. There was a priesthood, the Kohen, you hear the Jewish name Cohen, Katz, Cain, Khan, those are all from the priestly tribe, from the Levites. And there weren't rabbis at the time. Moses wasn't a rabbi, that title didn't exist. And that was dynastic, so it went through the families. So there'll be two shifts I'll mention. So that lasted for several hundred years. In 586 BCE, the Babylonians, today's Iraq, came in and conquered the region. They deported the people to Babylonia, right? They took them as captives, and the temple was destroyed. So then the Jews had to come up with plan B, right? There's no temple. They were a temple-centered people. So there's temple, priest, and sacrifice. So if you can't do that, you can either say, okay, we'll roll up the carpet and that's the end of our religion, or we better come up with plan B. So plan B evolved over centuries, and they were able to improvise, adapt, and overcome. So what emerged, not immediately, but over time, besides just the priesthood, were teachers. Eventually, they used the title rabbi, right? And to be a rabbi, it's not dynastic. So you can be a Jew by choice, is the fancy word now. You can choose to be Jewish, right? Not even be of Jewish lineage, and study and be a rabbi. So it's not what you're born into, it's what you choose to do. And there were no, at the time they had to improvise. If you can't have the sacrifices that they had, which were ritualized way of eating, then we'll have prayer. They had a prayer anyway before they did the sacrifice, right? So it was replaced with prayer. And the temple with the capital T became replaced later on with synagogues. We'll have to pray where we are, right? And I wanted to bring in Psalm 137. So those that are familiar with the Psalms will recognize this one. And there's a reason why I'm a rabbi and not a cantor, because I can't sing, but you'll recognize this song. Remember the old American Pie album from Don McLean? Well, on the other side is By the Rivers of Babylon, right? So it's from the Psalm. By the waters of Babylon, right? What did they do? We lay down and wept as we remembered Zion. What Zion? Jerusalem. We hung up our instruments. Our captors asked us there for songs. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. And what do they say? How can we sing the songs of the Lord while on foreign land? In other words, how am I supposed to do this? First of all, how am I supposed to sing? I'm not happy, I'm sad. I was sent it somewhere else. the temple was destroyed, and 2, we're outside the land of Israel. What do we even do? So those are the religious questions, if you will. And then this is the next part, which is in a way how Jews always survived. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. So no matter where they were, Israel was always the Holy Land. If you couldn't be there, you faced that way, right? So it's a way to survive. Those are the questions. The answers are, well, how will we do it? So that's what they had to figure out. So just the second part of the history lesson is that, and it's very interesting because all these powers are still fighting with each other in the map today of the Middle East, and I'll get to a map in a bit, right? So Iraq, Babylonia conquered right all the way to the sea, which was including Israel. Well, not very long thereafter, Persia, which is today's Iran, conquered Babylonia and was the great empire all the way to the sea. So then they had Israel, and Jerusalem. And I put this in because this is very cool for us, trying to build respect for each other and learning about each other and understanding and friendship. And so there was the king was Cyrus, and Cyrus is still remembered as the great leader. He was also politically very savvy. So he allowed the Jews to go back and rebuild their temple. He accepted all the multiplicity of different religious groups. He allowed them to practice their various faiths. And of course, he said, you pay your taxes to me, but you can go do, your religious stuff. You like that? Great. And he politically believed that by allowing that, it would strengthen the people. So that was part of it. So that's kind of interesting. And that's why I wanted to mention him. And I did some research. So it's at the British Museum. So when you start traveling again, you can go see the Cyrus cylinder. Okay, and this, I'll put all these on here. I'm not going to read everything to you, but oopsie, Judaism goes back 4,000 years. And the first Jewish person, if you will, is Abraham. And of course, his understanding of God and Judaism is certainly a lot different than ours today and the practices and so forth. But we understand it as a covenantal relationship, which means, in a way, I always think it's funny that obviously I have my obligation as a person, but God also has an obligation. What's God's obligation? To be God, to be faithful to us, to whatever that means, however you want to interpret it. So Judaism is a way of life and a faith, and I'll get into it a little bit more. And maybe one of the most important events that we celebrate and is a lasting theme in Judaism, and I'm going to try at the end to sum up, that's why I have that on one foot. But a lasting theme is the idea of freedom. So we tell that story of leaving Egypt. It's a symbolic story. It can be literal, but it's also a metaphor. So it's a story of the past that we tell in the present, but really with a view towards the future. So and that's why it's so seminal. And we're still dealing with that in our world today. We're still dealing with inequalities and all the things we have to work on in our society and in the world. And ultimately it has the theme of, if you want to imagine messianic times, in the Sabbath, the traditional prayers have that the Sabbath is sort of a foretaste of the world to come, right? Because you're not enslaved to anything. You don't have to work. You get to rest a little bit. So that theme is very important. And also the theme of a promised land. What's our promised land now that we're coming out of COVID? How can we move forward? So I'm going to give you some highlights. Obviously, Judaism has a belief in monotheism, one God. But again, there's different ways of understanding that even within Judaism and even within traditional Judaism. So even aside from, let's say, the liberal denominations, which I'll get to, even within traditional Judaism and even in the Bible itself, even in chapter 2 of Genesis, you already have two different names of God. You have the YHVH, Yahweh, which we pronounce Adonai, and you have Elohim. So you already have different names. Then later on, you have Shaddai, Almighty. So all those names represent different attributes of God, right? And we use the Holy Blessed One. We have the Oh Merciful One. We have all kinds of names. creator, omniscient one, higher power, all those things are, we even have our Father in heaven. It's in Hebrew, and that's one of the names, a God of mercy. So we have all these different attributes of God. And the name Israel, it's one of the great stories. It's 11 verses. It's one of my favorite stories. Jacob wrestles with an angel, and I don't know if it's a literal angel, or maybe just it's his conscience, or maybe he's wrestling with God. But his name change after that blessing is no longer heel, right? Because he's in competition with Esau, and he was clutching his heel when they were born. And now he's a man who wrestles with God and wrestles with faith. And he doesn't die. He lives. He survives that. He makes a little altar, and he prays, and he limps away. So he has this profound spiritual experience. He doesn't come out unscathed, right? But his name is changed, so he has a blessing. So to me, that's very symbolic, because I see Judaism as a way. It doesn't have every simple answer. It doesn't say sit in the corner and pray, don't ask questions. No, the whole thing is about asking questions and trying to find some meaning and some purpose in life. And maybe one of the most well-known prayers, it's called the Kaddish, means holy, sanctified, because it starts off, may God's name be holy and sanctified. And we use that as a prayer. It's not only a prayer when someone dies, but we say that as a mourner's prayer. And it's ironic because it has nothing to do with death. It has to do with life. And maybe the hardest time to affirm life is when we lose someone and it doesn't seem fair. So how do we make peace with that? Well, we wrestle with God, and we still try to find meaning and purpose in life. So a little bit about that. I wanted to add that Judaism has been able to both adapt and retain. So going back to the history, we've lived in many different places through different experiences, and we've had to figure out how to adapt to the host culture, acculturate. And if we acculturate too much, then we're gone. So the only place where there wasn't like a huge amount of anti-Semitism where Jews lived for probably 900 years was China. And guess what? The Jews that lived in China, they didn't have any real anti-Semitism, and they completely assimilated by like the 1900s. And that was the end of that community. So there's that fine line of adapt and retain. And that's a challenge today, living in, especially in America, which is a big open society, and we're a very small minority. And not everybody's that religious necessarily. So that's one of the challenges. So let me go on. I wanted to add, the foundation obviously is the Torah. Torah means teaching or instruction. It's the first 5 books of the Holy Bible. And we have this idea of obviously all life is sacred. And I wanted to add that there's also, this would be a whole different lecture, but even the animals' lives. So the ideal is to be a vegetarian. To me, one of the strengths of Judaism is, though, that we're human and we have human needs. So animals are permitted, but with certain restrictions. You can't just shoot an animal and think it's fun and eat it, or hack the head off of a chicken and watch it run around. No, no, no. It's sacred. You're allowed to eat that animal, but you have to know that you're taking something's life. So you're not allowed to have the blood from the animal. It has to be prepared in a special way so that even eating, which is one of the most physical things we can do, becomes more elevated. So, and the same thing, sex isn't a sin in Judaism, the first commandment, right? So having a partner is a positive thing. It's how you channel, being human, our physical needs. And I wanted to add, so we're all created in the image of God. I know I'm jumping a little bit, but I'm giving you some highlights. Oopsie. I wanted to put this in, so that way, when you have questions after, at least I'll have touched on some of these things. There is a belief that the soul or the spirit lives on. Some Orthodox Jews may believe in literal resurrection of the dead. Most, I don't want to say they're not modern, but I'll call ourselves liberal. I'm not saying politically, I'm not putting any political things, but the liberal non-Orthodox denominations probably most people don't believe in a literal resurrection of the dead. But some people believe that the soul or the spirit lives on. There is a belief in the afterlife. Doesn't mean everybody believes in it, but there is a belief in Judaism in the afterlife. That belief probably came in and was influenced by the Egyptians and the Greeks who had those beliefs. So that's when it comes into Judaism. In the Bible itself, they don't have that belief. And the mystics like to believe in reincarnation of the soul. So that's definitely a part of Judaism. Again, does every Jew believe that? No, I have a joke about that too. We say 4 Jews and 8 opinions, but that's what makes it interesting, right? We don't all have the same view, and there's not only the same way to solve a problem or understand something. So that's what makes Judaism interesting. I wanted to mention this in case somebody wants to ask about, well, how do you view sins? So we do have confession. You don't go to a confessional or to a priest, but you can always talk to a rabbi. But each person is, in a sense, responsible for their actions. So the idea of bar and bat mitzvah means you become of age. And just like kids are growing up and they take on more responsibility, or they're supposed to, you become accountable. And the way you can atone for your sins is you make amends. And so Yom Kippur is the day of atonement at one mint with both yourself and your fellow people. So that's, you can do it anytime, but you don't have to freak out every single day. So Yom Kippur is that time period for atoning, for thinking about how you acted and ways that you can be better. And we even have a nice ritual, which is to go to a body of water like a pond or the ocean or a river and kind of symbolically toss out, all the bad things that you want to get rid of and sort of bring in the new year. So it's nice because you can start over. You're not, it depends on what you did, but you get a chance to kind of clear your conscience and your slate. Okay, the big ticket items. So I picked the key theological ideas. So we have God, Torah, Israel, and the big themes, creation, revelation, redemption. Okay, so I kind of talked about God and Torah. I'll get to Israel. Israel means 2 things. It means the land of Israel, but it also means the people of Israel. So we have a prayer we do every week for the Sabbath. It comes from the Bible. The people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath. That doesn't just mean the people in Israel. It means everybody. And the quote that goes along with that, someone said, more than Israel has kept the Sabbath has kept Israel, meaning keeping Jewish people connected. Right, so we'll get to that. I want to mention creation, revelation, redemption. Those are really big ticket items. Those are the themes. I'm not going to go into all the holidays and life cycle. That's a whole different class. And probably people know about a lot of them, and you can ask me whatever questions. But the prayer book follows that order. In fact, the prayer book in Hebrew is called Siddur. Siddur means order. This is the order of what the rabbis wanted to highlight. Like, you can say your prayers for whatever you like. Oh, I'm awake. I'm alive. I got up. Thank you. My family's here, or I had a good lunch, or whatever. But these are kind of the big ticket items to think of. And so every morning we have a prayer. You can write your own prayer. Creation. There's a world. It's a full moon. It was a full moon last night. It's a strawberry moon tonight, right? So we acknowledge something about the world and that there's something bigger than us, however you want to define it. So creation, same thing. All these things are open to interpretation, but these are the themes. Revelation, there's something sacred, and you can say it was revealed, through the stories in the Bible. You can also say we're discovering it. We understand things and we seek spirituality. So there's some special holiness. And then redemption. Redemption is, again, that theme of freedom. And then the bigger theme of the world being a better place for all people. And that can be physical. It can also be, messianic time. So those are the big items that are really brought out in the prayers and in the life cycle rituals and in the holidays. So they all are kind of acknowledged in all of those things. Okay, so I the purpose of it all and the underlying, the bottom line, the reason for all of that, why bother, is to sanctify life. So why do we do what we do? That's our spiritual path. So sometimes people say, well, all the religions are the same. Well, maybe the end result is the same, to have a spiritual connection. They're not all the same, or we would all be doing the same thing. They're different. They're different ways to climb the mountain. Yes, it's people seeking spirituality, and probably many of the themes are the same, looking for holiness in life, looking for some spiritual connection. So this is the Jewish path, and the value, the underlying value, is to sanctify these times and these events. If I just get up and I'm rushed every day and I run off to work and I never mark those moments, I'm missing something. So it kind of helps you see the bigger picture in life, and to pause and to remember those things, and to take a time to do that. And we mark, that's why life cycles are marked, and celebrated. And then the bottom line is to sanctify. Does anybody have any questions? You can put them in the Q&A and Wendy will let me know.
There's a couple questions coming. We'll get to them.
Okay, because I can answer them. All right. Because I can't see you, so I don't know who's watching me, but I'm just talking. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Israel from my perspective. And for me, one of my passions is Israel. And it's impossible to talk about the Jewish people without bringing in the connection to the land of Israel. And I would say it's a remarkable place. And as I said, it's one of, besides Judaism being one of the oldest continuous traditions, Israel is one of the oldest continuous places of civilization on earth. So if you go to Jericho, you can see, the walls came tumbling down. You can see through 26 layers of civilization. And it's a fascinating place. I usually joke that the country is so small, it's twice the size of LA County. So Israel's smaller than any state that we have. And the country's so small, you can't even write the word Israel on the picture on the map. That's how small Israel is. So it's a small country. It's very diverse, and it's very multicultural, despite all the negative stuff you hear on the news. It's very mixed because it's a small country and there's a lot of people there. And they speak English, they speak Hebrew, they speak Arabic, they speak Russian. They have people from Africa, they have Spanish speakers, French. Is a very kind of interesting melange of people. And to me, it's interesting to be alive during the time that Israel exists as a modern country. So she's 72 years young. It's one of the oldest places where people, since ancient times, under all these different places. They were under the Ottoman Empire for close to 500 years. And then the British after World War I till 1948. And then under their own independent democratic rule, which is very interesting, not simple, especially in that complex region of the world. So you can see Iraq and Iran, and those powers go back to ancient times, and the different players. And it's really not that much different than ancient times. So you have Turkey, you have, just like in ancient times, the Egyptians were a power, the Syrians were a power. They didn't have Russia looming over them in ancient times, but Russia is a big power player today, and of course, Saudi Arabia. But to me, it's extremely exciting to have the opportunity to go there, to travel there, to speak Hebrew, and to see Jewish people from all over the world. So the Jews that lived in Iran and Iraq were among the oldest continuous groups, and they left. So they had to leave. So I've met people, Iraqi Jews that, their families lived there from the time of the Babylonians 2,500 years ago. And now they came after 1948. So you meet people from all over, from most of the Muslim countries. They've come to Israel from those countries, which is interesting. So you have a lot of that influence, and I'll talk about multicultural Judaism. The other thing I think about a lot is this poster that I put on the right, because I was in Israel one time, And our guide pointed out a sign, and the words were in Hebrew. It was Mishoah, from the Holocaust, and they used the word Shoah, which means devastation. So from Shoah to Tekuma, which means renewal. And to me, that's what Israel represents. It's not to eradicate anybody else. It's very multicultural with Muslims. And just like we have our political things to work out in this country, they have political things to work out in that country. And they're making progress, I would say. But Israel does represent, I would say, renewal for the Jewish people. And to me, Israel ensures the survival of the Jewish people wherever we are living. Because if we don't have Israel, we don't have any security. And that's the bottom line. So the Holocaust destroyed 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population. And people say, oh, give up Israel and leave. Yeah, where are we supposed to go? Europe? I don't think so. The Jews are fleeing Europe because there's a lot of anti-Semitism. So it's not a simple conversation. But pretty much every email I get from different news sources every day talk about increased anti-Semitism. It's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable thing to talk about. And it's tied in with anti-Israel issues. That's a different conversation, but I just want to share that Israel's a teeny tiny country. They're not dominating the Middle East. So that's an aside, but I'll mention a little bit. Okay, so now I get to talk about women's roles. So this is kind of cool. There's a lot to say, but I'll say a little bit and see what questions you have. This is actually my 30th anniversary of being ordained as a rabbi. So I was ordained in 1991, and we're starting to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first woman reform rabbi. So she was ordained in 1972. So next year will be the 50th, so they're celebrating all year. They already started. And that, of course, that change came about because of our change in our American society, in Western society, with the women's liberation movement, right? So to acknowledge women's roles in society. And I like the term egalitarian. I don't see a competition in my mind between genders. And I don't think God cares what your body parts are, that we're all humans. And to me, that's how I see things, that everybody should be accepted, to be able to participate equally and not have to be separated or segregated in prayer. So most of the Orthodox synagogues still separate men and women. So, and the women can be, a lawyer or a doctor or highly educated professional, but she has to sit separately from the men, and they don't get to be the prayer leaders with the men public. They can be teachers, they can give the lecture, but they can't sing publicly in most of the Orthodox synagogues. So it's challenging, but that's why I'm not an Orthodox follower. So we use the term egalitarian, and all the non-Orthodox denominations, I would say that battle is largely, it's fine. I mean, I don't think anybody, we accept one another and women fully can participate. And I think that that's uplifting for men and women. It's empowering to be able to lead and to participate and pray at your comfort level. The Orthodox are still evolving, but they've come a long way. Women have all kinds of roles. There is a woman who's an Orthodox rabbi at a synagogue in LA, and she still follows, the men do this and the women do that, but she's highly respected. She teaches and does all kinds of programs. So she's trying to push the boundaries from within, and that's her choice. And the other thing is that we've updated a lot of the prayer. So to be more egalitarian, to be more inclusive, and even, a lot of places won't refer to God as he, they'll just say God, or I was going to say Lord, but that's still masculine, but they changed the name, or just say Adonai, meaning a name for God. So those are some of the positive things. That's just a picture of me when I was in a program a couple years ago at the Western Wall. The woman on the left is a rabbi, and the one in the middle is from Brazil, and she was studying to be a rabbi. So I just picked some nice pictures to put in there. And you can ask any questions you like. Yes, women rabbis can get married. If men rabbis can get married, why can't women rabbis get married? What do you call this is a funny joke. So the title used to be, for the woman of a male rabbi. So the wife had a special honored title called Rebbitzin. It's a Yiddish word, like the rabbi's wife. So then they would make a joke that the husband, what are you going to call him? So the joke is you call him Lucky. It's supposed to be funny. Okay, so what are Jews concerned about? Well, the goal, if you will, is to make the world a better place. So we use this term tikkun olam, to healing the world, repairing the world. So that's a big part of Jewish practices, besides all the religious things. Judaism is home-based, it's personal, it's practiced, something you do in your home. There's also a big emphasis on community. It's really hard to be Jewish all by yourself, especially like in our country. It's not fun. It's fun to be part of a community. That's one of the things I like when I go to Israel, because I don't live in a big Jewish area. If you live in a big Jewish area, maybe it feels different, but I always feel like a minority because I am a very big minority. So it's communal, that you feel like you're part of this community doing things and sharing with others. And I think that's important. And the last part, a big part of what Jews are concerned about, is surviving in two ways. One is just assimilating out. That's a big problem. We just marry out of the faith and don't practice. That's just, people are culturally Jewish, but not necessarily religious. And they're just secular, and they're kind, they're nice people, they're just not particularly religious, so it dies out. And the other survival is like not being hated out of existence. So that's the other one. So those are some big themes in Jewish life. And I just put in some statistics in here, some of the denominations and so forth. So we live in many different countries. The largest two countries really are the United States, has about 6 or 7 million Jews. Israel has now about 9 million people, maybe 6 million Jews. And there's, some in England, some in France. Actually, ironically, Germany has about 200,000 Jews now. Many came from the former Soviet Union. Some are actually that have left Israel because there's opportunities for them in Germany. And some in South America. A lot of people have left many places because of anti-Semitism. So they try to go elsewhere. A lot of French Jews have left. They've either gone to Israel or some have come to California, to feel a little bit more secure. So we have different denominations. We have Orthodox. Orthodox means actually straight belief. These are all modern things. So with modernity in Western Europe in the 17 and 1800s, so Jews wanted to adapt. We don't live in a vacuum. So a reform movement started. Reform means change. So let's change. So they implemented changes. They had an organ, they played music. They wanted to be like the churches. They had fancy music. And as soon as you have a change, you have people that don't like it. So they bounce back. So there was, a group that opposed that. And then in the middle, you have the conservative, which means to conserve. So they didn't want to be either extreme on either side. So they wanted to adapt to modernity, not be as strict as the Orthodox. But I would argue reform doesn't mean you're not religious. If you're not religious, you're secular. If you're reform, you're still choosing to be involved in Jewish practice, but in a more modern way. And reform has changed a lot in the last 50 years. There's a lot more Hebrew and, tradition brought back in from the original, reformers, if you will. Can I tell you one of my bad jokes? Here's one of the bad jokes. They say, if you're Orthodox, you're crazy. If you're Reform, you're lazy. And if you're conservative, you're hazy. So it's just a joke, but or maybe it's a stereotype. I don't know. So I used this logo on the top right. It used to be the logo. There's a museum in Tel Aviv, which they actually just redid the whole thing. and it's a museum of the Jewish people, the Jewish experience. And I like this logo because it's a mosaic. And the Jewish people are a very diverse cultural mosaic, multi-layered, like I said, 4 Jews and 8 opinions, and that's what makes it dynamic. So we have music for prayer, for culture, we have special food for holidays, and of course, depending on where you come from, there's different food. We're rooted in Hebrew, we use Hebrew. Jews lived in many different places, and it's an interesting phenomenon, but developed their own kind of Jewish languages. These are the 2 most well-known, but there were many more. There were like 30 different languages. There was Judeo-Arabic, Judeo-Persian, Judeo-Italian. The 2 most well-known are Yiddish, which was like a German, Jewish, Hebrew mishmash, and Ladino, which is an old style of Spanish. So the Jews left Spain. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and the Jews had to get out. When Ferdinand and Isabella conquered Granada as the last place, and they had to leave. And so they left. They went to Portugal. Inquisition followed them. They went north. They could go to Amsterdam because it was Protestant, so it was more, if you will, multicultural. And they went to Turkey. They went to different lands, and they brought that language with them. So Ladino is an old style mishmash of Spanish and Hebrew and whatever. I wanted to add that, to me, Judaism is very joyous and optimistic. I think that's another reason that Judaism survived. I'm not a psychologist, but I think the fact that people always held on to the belief that the Messiah is going to come, whether you believe that literally or more figuratively, metaphorically, that the world will be a better place. And that's what gave them the faith to keep on going. So they didn't give up. There were always people that converted out, but there were always people that didn't, that kept their faith. And there were even people that became Jewish, even though it was against the law under Christianity and Islam. But they didn't all give up. They didn't all run away. They kept their faith, and it gave them strength. So they were devout in their beliefs, but that was an optimistic belief that in 2 ways. One, maybe God is going to remember us and send the Messiah to, heal the world, but it also comes through us, through making it better. You can't just sit and wait. So it's both. So that's a big part of Judaism. And again, the more Orthodox believe literally that the Messiah is a person that's going to come and make changes. And I would say the non-Orthodox believe that through our own hard work, we can make the world a better place. So I got this quote from somewhere. I thought this was nice. Judaism is a conversation scored for many voices.
That is nice.
And I am almost done. So I have 2 things left.
Great. You got lots of questions waiting.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I talked a lot. It's hard for me to talk and just see you and not like see the faces. So I hope everybody's not sleeping. But I think another big part that I wanted to emphasize, obviously, is faith, tenacity. They kept their traditions. A huge, really interesting topic is the crypto Jews, the Jews that left Spain or even stayed after the Inquisition of 1492. And they secretly kept whatever little semblances of things they could. Like they didn't just a lot of people converted, they had to, but some of them still retained some Jewish faith. And even the ones that went to Mexico, they still even there's still descendants today that have these family rituals. So they had some faith, they had some tenacity, and humor. Good humor is a big part of Judaism. So even the one on the left is from Balaam and his talking donkey, which happens to be this week's Torah portion. And it's comical. It's meant to be comical. The guy's supposed to be the seer, the prophet who doesn't see what the donkey, which is not supposed to be the smartest animal, sees, which is the angel. So the whole thing is meant to be funny and to point out some funny things. And at the same time, it's serious because it's the same story of the king who wants to destroy all the Jews, but the joke's on the silly prophet. So I put in some humor and optimism. And here's my grand finale, and I have a little 2-minute, it's supposed to be funny video clip. So there have been many attempts to explain the essence of Judaism. and or while standing on one foot, which is supposed to be, fast. So we have the 10 commandments. There are actually 613 commandments if you count them all out. They don't all apply today, but the 10 we all know about. Leviticus, which is what we've used for the golden rule for our group, right? So do unto others as you've had them do unto you. So this is love your neighbor as yourself. I like this one. It's in Micah. It's in another prophet as well. It has been told you, actually it says, oh man, but I took that out. Oh person, what is good and what the Lord requires of you? Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That's pretty nice. This is from the first part of the Talmud, from the early parts of the 1st century. The world stands on 3 things: Torah, divine service, acts of kindness. And I put in the Yiddish word. No, Yiddish didn't exist in the 1st century. It comes much later. But where there's no mensch, where there's no decent person, so you be the mensch. And then there's this great story of this Rabbi Hillel, who actually wasn't called Rabbi Hillel, because they didn't have that title. He lived like around the time of Jesus. He lived in the 30s, Jesus died in 33 CE. But so Hillel lived in that 1st century early on. And his counterpart, his rival, was Shammai. So it's sort of like UCLA versus USC. They never agreed on anything, 2 schools of thought. But when we talk about how we argue with one another, they didn't insult one another. So their families intermarried. So they weren't like the Capulets and the Montagues. they just disagreed. So Shammai was always the stringent one. Hillel is the more lenient one. So this is going to go back to standing on one foot. So I'll conclude with this. Hopefully it works.
Here's a little story I want to tell about 2 great rabbis, Shammai and Hillel. It started way back in history, and that's a long way back. Back in the days of the Second Temple. Shammai and Hillel liked studying, but they disagreed about everything. Hillel said hot. Shammai said cold. Hillel said young. Shammai said old. Hillel said good. Shammai said bad. Hillel said happy. Shammai said sad. And well, they couldn't agree on anything. So one day a stranger rolled into town, walked up to Shammai, looked him up and down. He asked a simple question. This is how it was put. Can you teach me the whole Torah while standing on one foot? Uh-oh. Now that sounds tough.
No way. It's impossible. The Torah has so much information, I can't teach you while standing on one foot. Now get.
So the stranger left for the house of Hillel.
Can you teach me the whole Torah while standing on one foot?
I'll give it a shot. I'll start right now. But as Hillel started teaching, the stranger just said,
Ow! I didn't mean for you to stand on my foot, Rabbi. I meant I would stand on one foot.
Oops. Sorry. Oh. What is hurtful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. Now go and study it.
That's it?
That's it, my friend. Just be good to one another. The lesson is simple. Be good to each other. Your parents, your friends, your sister and brother. And that's the story of the Hillel Shammai showdown. Get along, little doggies.
Oops, sorry. That's my grand.
Here's a little story I want to tell about 2.
So I wanted to end with this. So I had to have a little humorous story in there, but I'll end with this. So this is from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who I think died in the 70s. He was a really interesting scholar, very mystical, kind of old world, was brought to this country and was a professor of mysticism. He also marched with Martin Luther King in the South and believed one of his teachings was, pray with your feet, meaning get out and move, don't just sit and dream all day, but you have to take action in this life. So I like these words. And to me, it's very inspiring. So just to be is a blessing and just to live is holy, but being alive is no answer to the problems of living. To be or not to be isn't the question. The vital question is how to be and how not to be. And you probably all saw Fiddler on the Roof, but there's the song to life, l'chaim. So we celebrate life, and you're here now. So that's you know, yes, there is a belief in the afterlife, but this is your life right now. So live it. Don't be, you know, stuck at home the whole time. So make it the fullest. And then I just put some resources if anybody wants some. Oops, I think that was it. But there's tons of stuff on Judaism, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Well, there are a lot of questions. I'll try and get through these. Are you ready?
I'll do my best.
Okay, some might be shorter, and like I say, we'll try to get through them. So one question that comes up is, are there obligatory prayers in Judaism? And if so, do they have precise timings?
Yes, so there are obligatory prayers, and there is morning, afternoon, and evening, because they're based on, you know, it says Abraham prayed at dawn and Isaac did whatever and Jacob. So there's 3 times a day. That's where that comes from. And they highlight those themes. The morning prayers are longer, the afternoon is really short, and the evening is really short.
Okay. Here's another one. Is there an administrative body for all the Jews?
Are you kidding? No way. No, Jews could never agree on all. No, there is. I'm just laughing. I did that to be funny, but no, there is like a chief Ashkenazi rabbi in Israel, chief Sephardic. So the Ashkenazi are the Jews of European descent, Sephardic Jews of the Spanish, Middle Eastern, but no, and everybody follows their own like rabbi, or, I mean, I'm a member of the Reform movement, so there is, you know, laws and standards, but that doesn't mean that people don't do what they want to do. So there's no Pope in Judaism.
Okay.
And like I said, even within Orthodox Judaism, if you want to say that's the stricter one, there's all kinds of opinions and ways of doing things. So there's certain standards, but there's a lot of, you know, interpretation.
Okay, another question that came is, how many temples are there in Simi, and how many members are in your temple?
Okay, well, there's us, and I just have to make my really bad jokes. I'll be famous for my bad jokes. People say, well, what denomination or what branch are you? So those are all labels, and they create stereotypes. So I will usually respond by saying we are Reconservadox, and they look at me, and we take the best of everybody. So and there's the very Orthodox one, the Chabad, the Hasidic one. So there's 2 that are in Simi. We have about 80, 85 families, and I have no idea how many they have. I imagine probably small also.
Okay. Another question is, many of my friends ask why Jews don't eat pork, shellfish, or meat and milk, etc. How do I answer that?
So the Bible, actually that's rooted in the Bible. So it has, it just says don't eat certain animals. You're not supposed to eat pork. It doesn't give a reason. It's a holiness code. So we can go into interpretations, but it doesn't give a reason. And it also has in there, it doesn't say don't eat milk and meat. That's interpretation. It says don't eat a goat boiled in its mother's milk, and it's in there twice. And the best explanation I can have for that I heard that made a lot of sense was Judaism at the time was breaking away from the Canaanites, their rituals. And so, and that was a fertility ritual. To take a tender animal and cook it in the milk was like a fertility potion. So Judaism broke away from that. And also you don't have something that's, you know, meat is dead animal with milk which is the live. So it's a separation, but that's where it comes from. And then the rabbinic interpretation adds more layers around it. Okay, so we won't have meat and milk together at all. Some people wait 6 hours after they eat meat, so they just more restrictions, or have separate dishes between meat and milk.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Here's another question. Do you believe the covenant is only with Hebrews? If so, how does God relate to other people?
No, I believe that everybody's special. I don't think, sometimes people say to me, oh, you're the chosen people. Well, I don't walk around and say that. I think everybody's chosen for what they're doing and how they interpret it. So that's why I said that Judaism has its spiritual path. And maybe the fact that Jews were always a minority for the last 2,000 years, wherever we lived. So Jews had to accommodate to other religions. And so they didn't say you're this and you're that. They had to focus on kind of keeping themselves alive. So, and it's like choosing to be chosen. So I choose to stay in this path. I can just say, I don't want to be, Jewish. I'm just spiritual. No, I choose to still keep and honor these traditions to the best of my ability and to what, in a sense, what makes sense, how I want to interpret it. But I don't think anybody's less than anybody else. To me, I can't sanction that in any way. And I the same thing, if somebody wasn't born Jewish and they become Jewish, they're actually seen in a way as they're called a righteous person, a righteous convert, so that they chose to be this. So nobody's blood is better than anybody else's. We're all humans, so that's how I see it.
Okay. We'll take a few more. Is fasting obligatory in Judaism, and what are the fasting days, if so?
Okay, so yeah, fasting, there's 5 fast days. Haha, they go very slow. I know, another bad joke. Not the most important one is Yom Kippur. And because that one is mentioned in the Bible, it says, you shall afflict your soul. So they interpreted that meaning you don't eat, unless you have to. So I'll just add my approach to Judaism, not just me, rabbinic Judaism, health and common sense should always take precedence. So if somebody's diabetic, obviously you don't fast, you need to eat. You don't have to eat in front of everybody if they're fasting, but you don't have to, or you're pregnant or you're whatever, you're on medicine. But there are 5 fast days. So there are some minor fasts, and they're in August, usually there's what's called the 9th of the Hebrew month called Av, that commemorates that temple in Jerusalem. It was destroyed twice. So then it was destroyed, it was rebuilt, and then it was destroyed in 70 by the Romans. The Jews were like really kicked out, taken captive to Rome, dispersed. There was no third temple. And so it's a day of kind of commemorating all kinds of sad things in history. So that there's those days and some other minor fast days. And then some people had, we live here, we eat a lot. We're a food culture in this country, and we have drive-through. But people were very modest and poor up until modern times. And there were other fast days, like they fasted sometimes during the week. They didn't have all the luxuries that we have. And it's harder for us, I think. We're not used to fasting so much. But those are the main fasts. Yom Kippur, the 9th of Av. Some people fast. I didn't mention women in the Bible, but there's 2 books of the Bible named for women. One is Esther and one is Ruth. And the story of Esther, you fast. Some people fast the day before that holiday, because Esther fasted before she actually fasted 3 days. Nobody's obligated to fast 3 days, but she fasted before she, went to approach the king.
Okay, here's one that's a little lighter. Somebody's asking, when our Jewish neighbors attended my Catholic grandfather's funeral, they also came to the Catholic cemetery, but did not come to the graveside. They said they could not walk on the grass. Why is that?
Oh, you can, and maybe that person was a Cohen, like a Kohen. So if they were religious, anyone who's a descendant of that priestly group, some of them have the tradition, but that would only be somebody who's pretty religious, because most Jews would have no problem. Like I would go, I'm not a Kohen, and women weren't anyway, but they maybe wouldn't go to the cemetery. So again, doesn't apply today, but in biblical times when that temple stood, the priests couldn't, if they came in contact with death, then they were impure. So obviously it doesn't apply today, but it's still kind of a ritual that some people would hold, but most people don't even know about it. So they were probably pretty observant, I imagine.
Okay, a couple more. This question is, what do you think drives anti-Semitism? I hope it's not too tough of a question.
Well, actually, they're really kind of simple things. One is, I mean, there's a lot of factors. One is, it's easy to pick on people that are vulnerable. So one is just jealousy. There's a really good movie. It's called Anti-Semitism, The Longest Hatred. And it brings out a lot of issues. And it's sort of a way to pick on somebody that's vulnerable. So one is jealousy. And I guess, I don't know, maybe some people also want to put it in the chat, maybe have some other answers. Venting your own frustration. So you pick on somebody else, the underdog in some way. So it's resentment, jealousy. In that film, I know one of the professors makes a point that, you know, when Jews came out of the ghetto in Europe, they didn't just stay the underdog, they rose to the top of society. So it came from a culture of learning and pushing and knowledge. And, you know, and the people that came to this country, they maybe all worked in sweatshops, but they knew the ticket out of that was get your kid an education. So they pushed their kids to become educated. And so the Jews, you know, even in both in Christian countries and in Muslim countries, they were literate. Most people weren't literate in the Middle Ages. So Jews, they were thought of as, you know, different because they were different. And they didn't all give up. So people resented them. And, you know, I don't know, it's easy to pick on someone that's different than you. And we see that, you know, in our country, yeah, there's anti-Semitism, but there's a lot of all kinds of anti-whatever, anti-this, anti-that, you know, so you go after somebody who's different than what you are, maybe you feel threatened by it, you know, and I don't have a simple answer.
Yeah, I don't really think there is one. Our last question, how are you going to recognize the Messiah?
I have no idea. I have no idea. So when she arrives, no, I don't know. But that's a good question. I guess we'll all know. We do have a nice custom. It's a mystical custom. You know, at the Passover Seder, we have 4 questions. We encourage the kids to ask questions. We have 4 cups of wine or juice. You know, not everybody has to drink wine. You can drink juice. But because it's based on 4 promises of redemption in the book of Exodus. So when God, you know, remembers the slaves in Egypt, God says in Hebrew, it's "V'hotzeti v'hitzalti v'ga'alti v'lakachti." I will take you out, I will redeem you, I will rescue you, and another synonym for that. So, and then there's a 5th comment. So based on that, you know, they're not sure, is it? So we put out an extra cup of wine, and symbolically it's for Elijah. And according to tradition, Elijah will announce the arrival of the Messiah. So we don't just pre-pour the wine, but the symbolism is everybody takes from their cup and pours a little bit into the Elijah cup to show when will the Messiah come, when everybody, you know, is working really hard to make the world a better place. So I don't know, when the Messiah arrives, I think we'll all know, right? So, but thank you for that challenging question.
That was a challenging question. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I found it fascinating, and based on the number of questions, I think others did too. So thank you so much. And I also can remind people that this will be up on our YouTube page for the Simi Valley Interfaith Council. And just want to remind everybody that next month we're going to have a look at Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that will be an exciting event also. So if you missed anything today or you tuned in late, feel free to check out our YouTube channel, and you can find all the links for that stuff on our Facebook page. And if you subscribe to our Facebook page, you can find out when our next events are, and when events for Rabbi Michelle's congregation are. we share the events for all of the faiths in town here. So thank you very much, and we'll end it now, and everybody have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming. Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.